Thank you, Vincent. Now, to unpack this, I'm joined by Farouk Khan, former coach at the Esalen School of Excellence, former academy head coach at Kaizer Chiefs, and of course, assistant coach at Amakosi. Next to him is Coach Kevin Johnson, former coach at Al Ahly. We saw that, SuperSport United, as well as Platinum Stars. Did I miss any, gents?
A few clubs.
A few clubs. But you're the right people to have a chat with right there. Coach, I'm not going to ask you about Chiefs. We'll save that result for later. I don't know why my bulletin editor did not put it as a headline, but that's a story for another day. But maybe let's start with you, Farouk. We look at that insight, and we've been discussing how development in football. I mean, I remember when I moved to Johannesburg in the late 90s, when we used to cover stories, Esalen School of Excellence, that's where, Esalen Park School of Excellence, that's where we first went to. So many names pop out in my head right now when I think of what it was to where it is now.
Yeah, it was an exceptionally good institution, but I think it was born out of people with passion, not forgetting the late Ted Dimitru, who started development in Chibuku, and obviously people like Neil Tovey, Kevin Johnson, Sam Bata, Junaid Mal, a lot of people that played a huge role in ensuring that the school became an institution that produced world-class players. I say world-class players because a lot of the national teams in those days had at least a couple of those players, whether it be under 17, under 20, under 23, and that was a continuity which eventually led to some of the top talents that went abroad, like the Stephen Pienaars, and I mean, Kevin had a lot to do with that as well, and he'll speak about that. But it's just that there was so much passion involved, so much determination. We got back from Brazil in 1992, and we thought, you know, it's going to be an easy road, only realizing that when you take on the task of developing a young footballer, you're not just coaching him, you're mentoring him, you're a parent, you're a confidant. And so it's basically giving up a lot of your own time and effort, and it's a huge sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice that I think we enjoy doing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, you were part of the development at Kaizer Chiefs, the academy at Kaizer Chiefs. Coach Johnson, let me come to you. I mean, what Coach Farouk is saying is quite important. I mean, we take it for granted sometimes, and I think maybe on our side as well, as media, we call 18, 19-year-olds or 25-year-olds youngsters in football. But for you as a coach, when you sit there, that talent you wanted to be nurtured as early as possible, and that is what the aim of this school was for, to begin off with.
Yeah, look, I think what Farouk says, we had a crop of players, and I might say this now, I think there was about 30 or 40 players, and out of the 30 or 40 players, probably 89% of them played professional football. There was a time when SuperSport signed like 8 of those players. They all played professional football. But for us, it was never about getting them to play professional football, because we knew the program that we were running was going to make them professional players. It was not about football, but it was about the holistic attitude towards developing a player and knowing all the different steps that we would take in order for them to get better. And even now, I mean, Farouk has got his own little school that he runs now. He still produces players, probably with more or less the same type of model that we had then. And it came out. I went to Ajax, and we brought the same type of model through there. For me, knowing the diversity of this beautiful country called South Africa, and I don't think that is what we've hit proper notes going forward. When you look at people who have been there, done that, the people who came after us, the diversity of South Africa is what I believe we need to understand 10 times better.
But where does it go wrong? I mean, surely someone... there's some choice words I want to say, but I can't because we're here. But surely somebody must be sitting back and saying, but where did we go wrong? There's a couple of players that we're seeing right now that we're thinking of. I mean, there's a team that, I mean, earlier in the package, there was this piece with Emile Baron. There were a crop of players who went on to beat Brazil in Brazil. Not in Brazil, rather at the Olympic Games in 2000.
that was the Benny McCarthy era.
Yes. I mean,
and all that stems from what Bafana was like at that time, and who were the crop of players with pushing them at the time, and who was pushing the Bennies. because you had your Neil Tovies, you had your Masingas, you had your Dr. Kumalos in the Bafana team, and in the lower level you had your Benny McCarthy's, your Matthew Booths, your Quentin Fortunes,
Delron Buckley's.
Buckley's. That was the next crop of players. But below that was a crop of players like your Stephen Pinas, your Brett Evans, your Dylan Shepherds, your
Uljan Mabizelas.
Mabizelas.
OJs, yeah.
That was the next crop of players that were pushing those players. So there was always a look ahead up for the younger ones, and we would always teach the players that, guys, if you are available and you are going to be played for the under 17 or the under 19 and under 20 teams, you've got to be ready at any time. And because I think the biggest thing with the crop of coaches that Farouk mentioned was we went out into the world and we saw what the world was doing. But we didn't learn what they were doing. We stole what they were doing with our eyes and brought it back and said, guys, this is where we can get our players to the next level. And that experience, I don't think you could buy anyway. And books don't teach you that either.
Yeah. In fact, I want to read a line here to Farouk. I'm sure you will tell me where it comes from. It says, build a rich, robust talent identification and development pipeline that starts at the latest at under 13 at local football, and strengthen women's football structures significantly.
Sure, I think we've said that in so many corridors and so many platforms for so many years. I think to do that, we must take into account the history of how football was developed in the country. I think today, if you look at the youngster of today compared to those days, in those days, if you had a phone, it was a luxury. Many children didn't even have a cell phone. They didn't have so much exposure to social network, etc., etc. And that's not only us, that's the entire world. If you look at countries like Holland, they realized that street football was becoming something of the past. So they realized that they needed to have a substitute, and they started what we call development centers today. A lot of kids today don't play street football. Where you lived and grew up, kids used to play. Whether it was one pal, whether it was just an informal game.
Broken
kids
toes.
played. Yeah, and what was that? The game became the teacher.
Yeah.
And that was the best form of teaching, because I think too often we have coaches now at 10, 11, 12 that coach the skill out of kids. You shout at kids, you make these kids so nervous, you really take the fun out of the game. Whereas when kids played informally, they learn those skills that later on produce the likes of the Benny McCarthy's,
Yeah.
etc. So we got to do the same thing now as coaches. We need to create, and that's where we all singing from the same hymn sheet. Get schools football going. Get kids in primary school to start playing.
When we decided that you two gentlemen were coming, I did just some research on exactly academies, football academies. From the top 10, if you Google right now, which a parent, a mother, a father would do want to get his 12-year-old or his 4-year-old, there's only one football club currently playing the Premier Soccer League that features on there with an academy. Gone are the days where your Kaizer Chiefs were the #1 academies, everyone wanted to go there. Yes, Sundowns were then a league of their own. But it seems that SuperSport United are the only ones, realistically, if as a parent I want to look for a club for my youngsters that is out there. They look like they're in every province. Everyone else is people like yourself who are trying to ply back into the game and run these academy programs.
Well, it's important that we create a business model around it, because no academy can survive on its own. We talk about, Kevin spoke about us going abroad and stealing with our eyes. We became ideas thieves. You look at a country like Brazil, who's a third world country, very similar to us in many ways. They encourage coaches or players that have played the game and people that are interested in developing by empowering them financially and otherwise. The reason being that if you have, and this is common with them, you have at least 3 or 4 of their best players playing in top clubs in the world. Whatever those players are doing at Real Madrid as far as financial gains are concerned, they reinvest back in their country. They pay taxes on it. So automatically you have a benefit of people using football as a form of foreign export. But at the same time, you're strengthening your national team. Yeah. Because if you look at the clubs they're playing for, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, the Man Cities, the Man Uniteds of this world, that's playing at the highest level. And how did this come about is because football people in the country realize that football is a business. And you can't just use it as a social tool. When you're talking about Performance football, there has to be a business model attached to it.
Yeah, and I remember Kevin, Kevin as well, as I was saying, all the research I tried to do at one stage, Vision 2022, I'm not even going to go there, but because it's laughable where we are now in 2023, but they still have Vision 2022 on their website. The one thing, though, that was interesting, and you mentioned Bafana back in those days, in particular in the mid-90s or early 90s, we strived to be number 3 on the continent, strived to be top 20 in the world. We are so off the mark right now. Will we ever get back to those days where you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, if Bafana is playing in Brazil, you are there? Because personally, I'd rather wake up and watch Banyana because something's not right in our males football. The female footballers, they bring the business, but again, they're not getting a fair shake. Will we ever get back there?
Look, I think being in the game for more than 35 years, I think we had a Indaba called, I think it was 2000,
Yeah,
2022 vision. And if I could tell you what was said then and what has happened, it's chalk and cheese. I don't think that we use the people that made us get to the top correctly. For example, Clive Barker, just an example. We did not get him to understand how he got that team to win the Nations Cup. And after that, we did not use him correctly in order to groom the next one that came along. We hired a witch doctor, we hired somebody else after that. They called him the white witch doctor or something like that.
Yeah.
And they just took our game to 5 steps backwards. Whereas we could have told you, coming from Brazil, that time, that if ever there's never been a foreign coach who's won a World Cup for a foreign country. Never in the whole football history. The person who's going to win it for you is the person who comes from the ground where you come from. And that's exactly what Clive Barker done. He won the Nations Cup and he's a South African. So there's a lot of those type of synergies and those type of things that's going around that I think when we sit around a table and we can talk and people can understand what we have given the game and what we've developed out of the game, then maybe we can get to where you're saying we should get.
Yeah.
And I do believe, and I say this whenever I go on TV, that I think South Africa has some of the best players on the continent. In fact, I think they have the best players on the continent.
I'll give you an example. When we studied in Brazil in '92 and afterwards, we watched some Brazilian kids, 10 years old, and did a comparison. And we said, if we take a group of kids from the township, we'll trash them, 6 or 7 of them. And they looked at us and they said, yes, you would. But what we do from 9 and 10, you don't do. It means what they invest in that 10-year-old for the next 7 or 8 years, we don't do. And it's clearly the case. You can't expect that talent to emerge. Talent is not enough. You need to nurture that talent. You need to polish that diamond. We have so many diamonds that if you look at us, we are blessed with so much raw skill. That if we mine that skill, if we polish that diamond, if we cut that diamond, we will produce players that can play in the highest level in world football and ultimately have the strongest national team on the continent.
And again, I don't even know what to say because all you're saying is fact. I mean, what you're saying is fact. And I hate making comparisons, whether it's rugby or cricket. Where are we in as far as the national structures, the people who lead our football, well, SAFA and Premier Soccer League, school sports? I mean, again, the reason why I say I don't want to compare it, because yes, rugby and cricket, they sit there and they say, look, Tabis was playing under 11 there at that school. We're going to make sure that we go to him and say, look, parents, don't worry about the school fees, don't worry about university, we'll take care of him, we're going to groom him to be the next striker for South Africa. Why are we not trying to implement some of those things? I'm not saying blueprint copy from there, but surely there's something we can learn from teams or national teams which are South African that is working, because the penchant is there, the challenge is there.
Well, I think we must applaud what has been done with the PSL as far as SuperSport investments have been concerned, sponsorship, what Patrice Motsepe has done on the continent. We have to applaud what they've done. But that is only from a financial perspective and from a structural perspective when you talk about one of the best leagues, if not the best leagues, which is the PSL. But again, a lot more needs to be done at grassroots. I think we get players to join these academies at a very late age. And obviously, those that do come at the age where they have the younger teams are not competing against teams of equal strength. So if you look at the junior leagues, if you have PSL clubs participating in those leagues, 3 or 4 of those clubs dominate those leagues. Because if you look at the season and there's 15 teams, there's only basically 3 teams that compete.
Yeah.
For the rest of the season, you're beating people 7, 8, 9, 10, and that's not going to improve you. You've got to play against better teams to improve. That's from a competitive perspective. Also, a lot of people sponsor competition and not development. There's a difference. When big companies sponsor competitions, they're sponsoring the end product. What about investing in the development of that player so that the standard is much higher and ultimately the best players are identified like we see in rugby, like we see with the Craven Week. Those players at 12, 13 are selected. We should have the same thing happen. We had the interprovincial, which Kevin and I were involved with in those years, and we basically selected our national teams from the interprovincial because the competition was so strong. Western Cape would select their best players, so would Gauteng, so would all the other provinces. For some reason, that was done away with. I think they've tried to start it again. But again, we need to ensure that we don't get confused with the amount of knowledge that's available. You need to have people with experience that will say, this methodology is tailor-made for the South African athlete. Because you could be looking at the internet and finding coaching methodology which is a fay with other countries. But we have to realize that whatever we take, we must adapt to our unique specimen, which is the South African football player.
Yeah, well, tell you what, FIFA's high-performance specialist Abdul Faisal Chipsa believes that South Africa is on course with the TDS pilot program. They currently have this. It's supposed to, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that because, like we were saying, the reason why we're discussing development football, because obviously there's something lacking. Yes, coach, under-17s at AFCON, but under-20s missed on the World Cup. It's a balancing act. We'd like to see. I don't believe we should not have an under-17, under-20 all at the World Cup. I think the only team that's qualified for World Cup consistently at senior level is Banyana. We've gone to the days where we had Amak Gluk. I mean, everyone knew who Amak Gluk were because we knew that. In fact, I think at one stage Amak Gluk was supported more than Bafana. But again, because we went to development, we knew who they were. They were youngsters, and they flew the flag.
Yeah, well, I come back to the thing I said before, is that when we started this whole journey of ours, of coaching, we followed the biggest man in the world, and that was Madiba, who said sport can change your country. But he said that because there's a lot that can do, and I say this in all respect to everybody, we don't understand the diversity that we have.
Yeah.
And when we don't understand the diversity, you cannot develop to the next level. And once you know that, you'll be able to take the players to the next level. A simple example is that most of the players we brought in at the school were either English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana. They would speak that language only. But let me tell you, when Stephen Pienaar left the school, he could speak 5, 6 different languages fluently without nobody teaching him. We told them and we taught them to know each other, to teach each other. And maybe I think we had a lot of that with the Clive Barker area as Bafana. We had a lot of that with the Benny area in that team.
Yeah.
Like you say, Amagluk, what's it called?
Amagluk, yeah.
That team.
Yes.
And even at 17 and 15 level, they had that. And like Farouk says, when we watched the USASA tournaments, those were the best teams at that moment playing football, and we were able to select the best to play. So we were young in the world of international, as far as lots of things are concerned, politics, sport, we were young as a country. And even now, I think we are still young, only 35 years in democracy. I think we're still young. We still have a lot to learn. But Farouk learned a lot. And I myself, personally, I'm not a fan of following FIFA's rules. Because FIFA is developed for Europeans.
Yeah.
FIFA is not developed in Africa. And this is with the difference about me as a coach. When I read something from FIFA, I read it with 3 eyes.
Yeah. What's
One
theirs?
for Europe and 2 for South Africa.
Yeah. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. I'm being told that I must hand over to Kate. Oof. Farouk?
Yeah.
Khan, thank you very much there, Coach.
Always
Kevin
a
Johnson,
pleasure, sir.
much appreciated, gents.